because you did mention to me that you regularly read the letters of Van Gogh.
Yes, yes. Well, during the lockdowns, I've been reading them for over many, many years. But during the lockdown, as we all experienced various different forms of isolation, I think some of us got a little bit obsessed with this, that, or the other. And in my case, it was Vincent's letters, which are quite simply the most extraordinary things that I've ever come across. Gives you a huge insight into his work ethic, into his personality, into who he was and what interested him. And I read one of his letters a day as a sort of, not a mantra is the wrong word, of course, but as a daily habit.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Artist Well. My guest this morning is Michael Wann. He lives in Sligo, but he's over in Dublin, and the reason he's here is because he's got a solo exhibition on at the moment in the Solomon Gallery. It was launched last Thursday and continues on for the next 2 or 3 weeks. I'm not sure. Michael will give us an inkling on that. So I'm delighted that we have this opportunity to talk to Michael on two counts. One, that it coincides with the fact that his show is currently running. And secondly, because, and I never normally say this, I happen to love Michael's work and his style because he uses charcoal. And as you can see from my background, I also use charcoal, but mainly in portraits. So we have a particular love of charcoal together. So you're very welcome, Michael. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Not at all, a pleasure. So you're up for a couple of days, are you?
I'm up visiting my mammy. Yeah,
You're visiting your
I'm up.
mammy.
I'm from Dublin originally, so I'm up
Yeah.
here quite a bit. But needless to say, the show opened on Thursday night, so we had a busy evening.
So, Michael, you were born in 1969 in Dublin,
Yes.
but you very shortly after leaving school, you went straight over to Sligo. What was the reason for that? Why did you want to
Well,
get out of the big smoke?
I always found Dublin a little bit overwhelming. I mean, it's not a big city, but certainly when I was growing up, it felt like a very big and impersonal place.
Hmm.
Um, I had spent some time in London after school. I guess, well, I signed up for a 1 year course in art and design in what was then the RTC in Sligo. It's now an ATU and a university.
Hmm.
Um, Simply to get out of Dublin for a little bit. But what I found in Sligo was a wonderful, wonderful community of people. And I suppose that impersonal feeling in Dublin, it was a very local scene in Sligo and much more kind of manageable or something. There was just something
Hmm.
about it.
Yeah. And when you went there first, were you fairly in a very remote place, or were you in the center of a
No, I
town?
was in the town, but my main lecturer in the course that I was doing was Sean McSweeney, the painter.
Hmm.
And Sean had a big influence on me. He taught me for 3 or 4 years. I signed up after the 1 year course in art and design. I signed up for a 3 year diploma in fine art.
Hmm.
And I suppose Sean McSweeney, the way he spoke about landscape and the way he spoke about community and his love of people, he was a very, very kind man. He had a very big influence on me. And when I look back on it, I mean, it's 35 years I'm in Sligo,
Mm.
and he was absolutely instrumental, I would say, in my thinking.
Yes, yes, okay. And didn't you go back again later on to do a further course in art?
I went back to get my degree as a mature student, as my kids were growing up. I went back to get my degree thinking that I'd get a post as a teacher, but of course
Oh.
that didn't happen. Um, but
Okay.
it was an interesting thing to do, certainly. So yeah, I got my degree then as a mature student.
Yeah, but you still do a little bit of teaching though, don't you?
Oh, I do, but I'm not a trained teacher, and I always regard my teaching as quite informal. But
Hmm.
yes, I teach workshops with I work with Art Form down in Waterford in Dunmore East,
Yes.
and I run classes and various other things here in Sligo. Well, in Sligo, yeah.
Okay. Okay. And Michael, tell me, I mean, as I said earlier, we both have a love of charcoal, but why in your case did you plump for that particular medium? Why not oil paint or watercolor or whatever?
I spent childhood drawing, just with pencil or a big biro, copying pictures, copying faces out of my dad's newspaper, or the geography textbooks from school. I was always fascinated with black and white photography and spent a childhood and teenage years simply copying black and white photographs, sketching, I guess.
Yeah.
So I, there's something about drawing that's very, very immediate that I always found that I could express myself better through the immediacy of drawing. Whereas
Hmm.
with oil paint, as anyone knows, there's an awful lot to get to know, the different techniques and the drying times. It seemed terribly, I mean, I did paint at college, but it seemed very complicated. And I always used to get quite bogged down in it. So being in the life class, for example, life drawing just seemed like a far more immediate sort of experience.
Mm. And your subject matter tends to be more landscape than figurative, am I right?
Yes, it's a long time since I've been in the life room. Yes, I'm pretty absorbed with my surroundings in terms of landscape. Sligo, as anyone will tell you, is a very, very beautiful place, but it has very dramatic weather as well. So we're surrounded by mountains and lakes and the sea, so we get an awful lot of pretty grotty weather as well as wonderful landscape. So it had a, and again, going back to Sean McSweeney, he spoke about landscape in a way that I've never really heard anyone speak about. He had an absolute love of his local landscape, and it's obvious from his work, from his paintings. He
And
was,
did you become friends with him?
sorry.
Or did you actually become friends with him, or was
Well,
he?
he ended up living, I mean, I ended up living quite close by him. So we were in the
Yeah.
same community. So we'd cross paths very regularly.
Hmm.
And there was something about him that he was very interested in community. So the conversations weren't necessarily about art and painting. There was much more about our immediate environment and the people that you would meet in the local pub or whatever it is. So he was
Yeah.
very, very down to earth. He was very, very accessible.
Was he? Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Fantastic. And the 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 subject matter, I think there's sort of deeper meanings in the sort of your chosen genre, aren't there?
Well, I remember somebody saying once that I like the kind of more neglected aspects of landscape. And certainly that's been a theme throughout the work that, the more mundane, the better. So I really enjoy
Hmm.
drawing ditches and broken gateposts and things like that.
Yeah.
It's not, those are the things that appeal to me. The
Yes.
idea of woodland and, the undergrowth and the dampness and the wetness,
Yes.
I often feel that when you're making work, like if you're out, we'll say, I've said this before, if you're out walking and it's a windy old day and the leaves are blowing and the rain is pouring in and you're getting wet, somehow your work, if you're trying to capture that, your work should try and capture some of those things or try, you know, that's the ideal, I guess, is to try and capture some of that atmosphere.
Yeah. Absolutely. Now we are going to have a little tour of your studio because you did a video, a great video of that. Given you're in Dublin, you're not there, so we will talk about that. But I'm interested in your sort of work ethic, and how you work, when you work, anything like that, and sort of influences, because you did mention to me that you regularly read the letters of Van Gogh.
Yes, yes. Well, during the lockdowns, I've been reading them for over many, many years. But during the lockdown, as we all experienced various different forms of isolation, I think some of us got a little bit obsessed with this, that, or the other. And in my case, it was Vincent's letters, which are quite simply the most extraordinary things that I've ever come across. Gives you a huge insight into his work ethic, into his personality, into who he was and what interested him. And I'd urge anyone to dip into the letters. And
Hmm.
even today, now, my practice today involves I read one of his letters a day as a sort of, not a mantra is the wrong word, of course, but as a daily habit, a daily sort of
Yeah.
a dip in.
I know. No, no, I was fascinated when you told me that when we had a brief chat earlier in the week, and I thought Vincent's letters. My God, that's intriguing. So I actually looked it up, and I was scrolling through these massive letters. I mean, they're very long to his
Oh
brother,
yes, yeah,
very,
yeah.
very long. And for some reason, one little sentence came out, and I just said, "That's interesting." There's too much to read, obviously. to take in unless you do it your way. But I found this little line and I said, you know what, I'm going to read that one out because I just thought it was rather beautiful. And this is his letter to his brother Theo. And it says, try to take as many walks as you can and keep your love of nature, for that is the true way to learn to understand art more and more. Painters understand nature and love her and teach us to see her.
Well, that's beautiful. I know
Isn't
that
that nice?
well.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I just thought that was lovely.
yeah.
So in your studio, are you a sort of a 9 to 5 or 5 days a week, or are you like a
Um,
dog with a bone? Once you get into a project, there's no stopping you.
no, I get well. Yeah, drawing is an obsessive activity, and it does go back to childhood. Spending, I wasn't particularly academic, so long hours spent at the back of the class, ignoring the teacher and scribbling away in a jotter. I put in long hours in the studio. I go and I treat it as a job. I think Sean taught me that, and I mean, any painter worth their salt will tell you that it's a hard and difficult job being an artist, but that it takes that you need to put the time into it. So I treat it like a job. I go to work at 9 o'clock in the morning, and I generally knock off at 6, and I invariably work 5 or 6 days a week.
Yes.
Um, and as you say, there are always projects going on, so you do become obsessed, and time goes by without you noticing, and suddenly it's 6 o'clock and time to go home. And it's probably in the past a curse for my family because all I want to do is be back in the studio the next day.
I
In
know.
any event, it's one of those things. It's a slightly ridiculous kind of thing to be at, but it is a bit of an obsession, really, and it's
Oh, absolutely. And
quite difficult to tear yourself away.
yeah, and I think if you look at your work, which we will in a while, um, it's incredibly detailed, and some of the work is extremely large. So you're looking at sort of maybe 2 weeks to finish a piece at least.
Oh, very often, very
Yeah.
often.
Yeah.
Now I work quite quickly. I don't mess about. Um, and as I say, I put in long hours, and most of the hours there isn't too much sitting around.
Mm.
Obviously, there's periods when you're making a piece of work that you have to sit back and look and absorb what you're doing. But I would often have 4 or 5 drawings on the go at the same time. And I think that's part of the obsessional thing that if you get stuck on a piece of work, you've always got something else in the back of
Mm.
your mind that you've always got other things to get on with. Do you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. I want to have a look at your studio.
Okay, well, my studio forms part of Anamore Estate in Collooney, County Sligo. And my studio, in fact, is an old tack room, part of the stables buildings. This is the studio here. It's quite a small room. I have storage elsewhere, but it's a little bit damp. But I have a nice fire that keeps me warm. Yeah, it's part of Anamore Estate in Collooney. What else can I say about it? Maybe it's probably better if you ask me some questions.
Well, yeah, and I see a number of. Would you, for instance, when you're drawing, do you draw standing up against the wall, or do you sit down?
You can see a chest of a drawing chest on the right hand side,
Can.
bottom right
Yeah.
hand side. I would draw on that if it's small scale work, so I would draw standing up, but then I would also draw at the wall if it's a piece of bigger work. You will see shortly in the video my drawing corner, as I call it.
Okay.
So you can see some of the bridles hanging up there on the wall. This
Uh,
building was built in 1840, no, 1862.
Gosh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was trying to work out what the saw was doing there and various other things, and I thought I wouldn't ask, but
Well, I sometimes saw bits of wood.
fair enough, fair enough. Now, another thing I notice, Michael, is you've got canvases there, and I would have thought you were almost exclusively on paper. But do you actually draw on canvas with
Um,
charcoal?
yes, I do. I draw on primed canvas. KM Evans on Capel Street in Dublin do this wonderful fine grain canvas. It comes from Italy, I think. And I've been using it for many, many years. It's a wonder. It takes charcoal like a dream. Now there's tricks to it, and it's difficult, but yeah, it's absolutely doable. And particularly on large scale work, where if you're dealing with a large piece of work, and 5 foot by
Mm.
5 foot would be considered relatively big for a drawing, I imagine.
Sure.
I'm not going to frame something like that. So obviously the canvas stretcher is the support and the presentation. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. And this is the studio dog.
That's the studio companion. Yeah, I don't know what I'd do without him. I'd be lost without him. His name is Oliver.
Right. Yeah. And he's constantly there, is he?
Oh, he's with me every day. Yeah.
Wonderful. There's a lovely fire, a lovely stove.
Oh, I'd be lost without the fire as well, I can tell you, because it's an old building and it's, cut stone and it's a damp old place without a fire. So yeah, yeah. So that's the drawing corner, in fact.
Ah, right. Yes. Yes.
I would quite often I work out of black an awful lot and I sand back the paper. So I'd more often than not be found on my hands and knees in that corner sanding back a very heavy duty Fabriano paper.
Just carry on around here.
So you can see that there's any amount of work on the walls, most of it in progress. That the process of drawing, I suppose, is spread over, over any given week that you would have at least 4 or 5 pieces of work of different scales and different themes that are absorbing you and that you can work away on. So I mean, I try my best not to waste too much time. Short of the daily walk with the dog, most of it is in the studio.
Yeah. And what we're looking at here, this is none of this would be in the Solomon at the moment, would it?
No, this is all relatively new work in
Okay.
progress, just new ideas. I'm obviously interested in landscape, but when we look around the world, particularly in the last 10 years, we see pretty awful things happening, in terms of climate change and in terms of how that sort of thing is affecting different places. So I have a lot of, I suppose, exploring different themes to see what can be drawn out, if you'll excuse the pun.
Sure, sure. Now, I think we're coming to, sorry, I think you mentioned something about influences here.
Well, these
That,
are these are experimental drawings, and they come directly from reading Vincent's. I call him Vincent because he feels like a friend at this point, but reading Van Gogh's letters and imagining his life, it's all described in the letters, and just some of his experiences and trying to find themes within that. So you can see a train arriving at a train station there. You can see a canal with a barge on it. He would have traveled to Drenthe, for example, on a barge. He also was in London when he was a young man, and so there's the ship with the smoke is the ship, what, like a ship that in the 1880s that he would have traveled on, or sorry, the 1870s.
yes, yes.
So they're just kind of experimental drawings. They're more sort of personal and more sort of my response to some of his things. They may never be exhibited. I don't know. It's always good to have lots to work on. And in fact, there's only 2 existing photographs of Vincent van Gogh, and that's one of them with his back to us. I don't know, we see that? That's Emile
Yeah.
Bernard and Vincent van Gogh sitting at a harbour having a cup of coffee.
And there are no photographs of him face on.
There's one from when he was 13 or 14, a family portrait photograph. There are
Yeah.
plenty of fakes, but as far as the museum in Amsterdam maintain that this and the one of when he was 13 are the only 2 existing photographs of him.
That's very good. Yeah. I love it.
You can tell I'm a slightly obsessed with all
Only,
things Vincent.
only slightly, and with good reason, from what I can see. Yeah.
Well, I mean, important to note that when you look at his drawings, he captures perspective in a way that his drawings are absolutely superlative,
Mhm.
not to mention the paintings.
Yeah. But his words are equally interesting,
Oh, I think he was,
and the
I
way he
think he was,
speaks to his brother.
I think he was a genius. I really do.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, we'll say goodbye to Oliver. Bye bye.
Bye, Oliver. I miss you.
Yeah, that's it. Michael, I think we'll go straight into the drawings that we want to talk about.
Okay.
So, will you talk us through this and do mention the size because it's kind of relevant, I think, given it doesn't convey on screen.
This is the large drawing. It's about 4 foot by 3.5 feet or 3 feet. It's on canvas, and it dates back to a time where I was looking to experiment and push my practice into a different area. My work prior to that had been quite descriptive or just depicting trees and quite particular and quite fussy. And I was
Mhm.
quite frustrated with my process. Running in conjunction with this, that it's 20 years ago now, but my father had just passed away. And at that time, I lived on the edge of Lissadell Estate. Now, Lissadell at that time was quite a neglected sort of estate with various woodland and silent avenues. And I spent a lot of time in the months following my father passing away, just walking with my kids or walking alone in the woodland. The woodland at that time was fit, they were trying to tidy the estate up.
Mm.
So there was trees being felled and these great piles of sticks, which they would set alight to clear the landscape. It's another theme in my work that I'm very interested in, is the idea of a landscape in a state of flux. In any case, Lissadell at that time, if you walked, for example, you could go for a walk early in the morning and there'd be these smoldering pyres of
Yeah.
sticks. They seem to me to represent funereal pyres. Now, I know in retrospect, I mean, I would have spent maybe the following 2 or 3 years absorbed with trying to capture the essence of some of these things. But you can see in the drawing that it's quite a loose, expressive, sort of expressionist kind of drawing. I started to mix compressed charcoal with water, just simply to see what might happen. So you can see how the water is dripping down from the piece. And I think the next issue is the next image is a similar one. Yeah, you can see the drips at the bottom. These are all large scale drawings.
Mhm.
And I can say in retrospect that they do represent a type of mourning, I suppose, a gentle kind of process, that the time spent with your work was in fact a time of grieving, or a reflective time in thinking about my dad. So the important thing to note is that the drawing process carries some of that emotion in it, or some of that essence. And I think very often my work is about my life, and that through the process, through the time that you spend in your studio, I think we can touch on this later on with other images,
Yes. Yes, exactly.
but that the time you spend with your work is, I remember making this work and actually not caring what happened. It was a
Mhm.
very freeing time, both in terms of process and practice, but also with that quite gentle and cathartic feeling of, I don't want to use the word healing, but along those lines, that the process of drawing itself is the important thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Very interesting. Yes. Now, this is
This is
called
a
Autumn
similar
Road.
thing, but some years later. This is a drawing on paper. And again, what interested me about including this drawing in our display is that it taught me something about the process of drawing. This was done this is about 2 foot by two, is it? No, I'm trying to remember, 76 by 58. So it's the standard, whatever, Fabriano size.
Yeah.
But it was on a heavy watercolor paper. And as I made it, I was using a heavy sandpaper to move the charcoal around, and the paper started to disintegrate. I don't know that you can see white spots down at the bottom of the piece.
Yeah.
Those
I'm just circling
actually,
it here.
yeah,
There.
those
Yeah.
are actually holes in the paper. And so any paper that started to disintegrate, I would glue it back onto the piece. So it felt as if you were including all sorts of different dynamics in the drawing, that it wasn't so much about making the drawing, but it was also about unmaking, or about disintegration. And it just taught me an awful lot about what you can actually do with charcoal and paper, or canvas, that it was just another avenue, excuse the pun, but another woodland avenue that you could walk down.
Yeah. And presumably the act of sanding creates a completely different texture when you start to draw over it.
Oh, of course, yeah. And
Yeah.
I don't want to make it sound as if it's easy, because you come across all sorts of things that you don't like in your work. And I think that's important to say, because drawing is full of failure as well as full of everything else. And
Yeah.
failure can teach you just as much about anything. So I really enjoy that about the drawing process, that it's full of unexpected twists and turns. It's full
Yes.
of things that you become uncomfortable with, and it's your job as an artist to try and bypass those or work your way through them.
Do you ever throw out work, or will you continue with it? And as you said there, you actually paste pieces back.
Oh,
Do you
well,
resign, or will you continue until you actually get it right?
well, I guess it depends on what sort of piece I might be working on, but I use a heavy Fabriano Tiapolo paper, which is, as smooth as a baby's bum. So you can
Yeah.
sand away at it. And if you're not happy with a section of your drawing, you quite simply push it back to gray and start again. And it's so versatile and so easy to do that. I mean, for sure, it takes a bit of bravery, but I've
Mm.
learned over the years that some of the best drawings I've made have come out of failed drawings or
Yes.
come out of that process where you're including the notion of failure in everything that you do.
Yeah. No, it's interesting because I was speaking to somebody recently and I said, "Do you throw out work?" And she said, "Yes, I do." And I said, "Well, don't." Oh, sorry, as a student. And I said, "Never do that. Keep on working it until it gets right."
Yeah, well, I mean, there's several ways of looking at it, but yeah,
Mm.
I mean, I wouldn't throw work out, but I mean, my studio is just full of old bits of paper and old drawings, and I know that I can just return to them at any point and start something fresh, you know.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Okay. Now this is interesting, and I put the three of them together because you said that they are really part of the same theme, if you wish. And this, yeah. Anyway, you explain.
Well, again, it's sort of noticing things in landscape, and again goes back to some of those themes about the more neglected, the better.
Mm. Yes.
That sort of everyday sort of thing. And quite often it's the neglected or things that people quite often don't tend to notice about our landscapes. And needless to say, these are derelict houses and cottages and so forth.
Mm.
And they've always been of interest to me. I think I prefer, I love exploring old buildings for a start, all that old peeling paper and cobwebs. This idea of history and the idea of aging is of huge interest to me. And it does go back to that landscape in a state of flux, or that over time things are changing or
Mm.
decaying. And it's of tremendous interest to me.
Yeah. And is there an element of sort of biographical influence in this that I think
Well,
you
there
mentioned?
is, and I'm hesitant ever so slightly because some of these things tend to be personal, but I'm here to talk about it, so I may as well include. Uh, there are, let's see, there are elements
Yeah.
of that, and I think there's elements of that in all of my work where you are naturally in the time that you spend in the studio reflecting on things in your life. I'm an adopted child, for example. And so, I mean, it took me years to notice that my interest in the idea of neglected things or things left behind, like piles of sticks or broken windows or derelict buildings, was
Yes.
all in some subtle way connected to the fact that I was adopted. So yes, yeah, it is biographical. How do you pronounce that word?
I'm not too
Biographical.
sure. Biographical. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
But I don't ever want the work to be defined by that point. It is there and it's very important to note it, but it's just as much about representing something, about experimenting with your processes, experimenting with your mediums and your supports. The biographical stuff is vital to me,
Yes.
obviously, as a person, but I don't want the work necessarily to be defined by that.
No, I fully get that. I fully
Yeah.
get that. I'd like to mention, just in case we forget, that your work since 2003, you haven't missed 1 year at being accepted to the RHA annual exhibition,
And
and that's quite a record.
that's not strictly true. I missed 1 year in 2014.
We'll allow that.
No, I've been very fortunate with the RHA, and I've been lucky enough to win a few awards there. I won the AXA Insurance Drawing Prize in 2006, which I couldn't believe because in the actual exhibition, it was for one of the piles of sticks, one of the ones we saw at the beginning.
But
I
we
couldn't
have
believe
to
it.
move on. Yeah.
There was a wonderful big Jim Savage drawing of a mountain in County Cork. And I don't know, does anyone remember Jim? He was an absolutely wonderful artist, huge, large scale pencil drawings, and far better than mine. In any event, they gave me the award and not him. I couldn't believe it at the time. And then 10 years later, I was awarded the Sean Keating Prize and the RHA Silver Medal for a large woodland study. So yes, yeah, they've treated me very well, and I admire the RHA and particularly the annual. It's a wonderful opportunity for artists, and it's pretty much open to everybody.
Yes.
Yes, the process of submission and selection is a difficult one to manage for artists, but I think it's a wonderful opportunity. And generally, it's always a pretty strong show with so many diverse things in it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's just a tremendous record, I think. Okay, this is in the model in Sligo, and somebody asked when I put this up on social media, did you actually draw that on the wall?
That's
Be-
drawn directly onto the wall. Yeah, it's 11.5 feet by 8.5 feet. And I was given an opportunity to take over one room in the model, which is the main, it's the art center in Sligo. And I held a studio there for over 12 years. So I was very much part of the workings of the building. So I was fortunate in that sense to be offered an opportunity. But at the same time, my work was going through what I can only describe as a bit of a lean period where I had sort of felt very mixed up about my own work and where it was headed. Um, so literally overnight, I decided to try and make a very, very large drawing of a view that was terribly, terribly precious to me. This is a place I would have walked with my children almost daily for many, many years. And I suppose the drawing installation was called it directly onto the wall of the gallery. You can see the drips down at the bottom and all the dust and debris of the drawing itself.
Yes.
I made it over 5 days, and it was on display then for a month. At which time I took a bucket of warm soapy water and I washed it all off again. So the drawing itself, it was called Comfort Zone, and it was about, I think in my studio at the time, the frustrations included becoming a little bit too precious about my own work. So I wanted to challenge myself to see could I make something very large and very precious and then just get rid of it or something. It was about memories fading, about it was about several different things. And
Yeah.
again, I don't want the drawing to be defined by any of those kind of slightly more personal or murky kind of themes, but it was about those things. It was
Yeah.
a thing that I was very proud of at the time, and when I look
Yes.
at it now, as we often look back, I'm a little bit embarrassed.
And how did you feel when you were sort of scrubbing that down and getting rid of it?
It was an extraordinary feeling because there was the actual palpable sense of loss and a
Yeah,
sense that you were, what am I doing?
I can imagine. I
Yeah,
mean,
it
if
was
it
very, it
was,
was very, it was very challenging. But I mean, the idea of it actually worked because I returned to my studio a week later, full of new vigor, or something
hmm,
new had occurred in my mind,
yeah,
and that it had broken something. So again, it's an example of how drawing can. Well, I've said that I don't want to be defined by it, but it can, it helps
it's
you
inevitable.
work
Yeah, of
work things out,
course, of course. And I don't know whether you mentioned it, but how long did it actually take you to do that
It
drawing?
took me 5 long, grueling days.
Yes,
I
yes.
had a scaffold that I'd climb up on and then jump down off and step back to see was I getting it right. So it was a very, very physical thing for 5 long days.
I can well imagine. A beautiful piece, though.
Thank you.
I'm glad you've got a photographic record of
Yeah.
it. Oh, this is called simply Sticks.
Yeah, this is again just returning to a theme of neglected landscape. This was a field beside where I used to live in Lissadell. This is a very large drawing on a 5 foot by 4 foot on watercolor paper.
Hmm.
Again, I'm very pleased with the detail of this drawing. It was a very difficult drawing to make. And there's always a period when you're drawing when there's always a stage. Alice Maher used to talk about drawing at that, when a drawing was half finished, quite often it was more exciting than the finish than the finish. Um,
Yes.
and I remember the moment that this drawing started to breathe all on its own. I can remember the making of it, so that's why I included it.
Beautiful. And this is Shadow Stream.
This is Shadow Stream. This was awarded the ESB Sean Keating Award at the RHA Annual and the RHA Silver Medal. Yeah, this is again about memory and trying to capture the essence of a place that you were terribly fond of, or again that had, one doesn't want to get too woolly about these things, but I am a fairly reflective person, and the things that happen in your life, it's really important that I try and mark these things, and I think I do that through drawing. This is a large canvas. It's a 120 by 100, and that's on the fine grain canvas I mentioned earlier.
Yes. Okay.
Okay, this is a bog standard bog study, as I call it.
Yes.
I was interested in this because this is on primed paper. I started to prime the paper just to see what might happen. So priming it with basically a household white paint and allowing the brush marks to remain. So when the paint is dry and you run charcoal over it, it starts to pick up some of those brush marks. And
And
it
you can
led
see
me
that
to,
quite clearly, yeah.
yeah, and it led me also to use a heavy kind of sandpaper to see could you gouge out some of the dried primer and see what might happen. So you can see in the sky and in various other places, there are things in the drawing that that I didn't feel fully in charge of. And it's quite a step when you're within the drawing process. It's something I mentioned earlier, when you allow the idea of accident or a different type of mark making into your drawing, it can be very exciting and very sort of, I'm not quite sure what the word is. I was
Okay.
also influenced very much so. I'm very keen on the landscape mezzotints of John Constable, printed by David Lucas in the 1830s. I don't know if anyone's familiar with them, but they really are worth seeing. So you can Google that. It's the mezzoprint, mezzotint prints of John Constable, the English countryside, and they're really superlative prints. They're really stark and dark and high contrasts. And the lines that you see in the skyline here in this drawing were influenced very much by those prints. So anyone who's interested in that should really go and check those out. They're really well worth seeing.
Okay. And this is called Brooks Wetlands.
Yeah.
Where does that come from?
Well, a friend of mine put it up on Facebook, and the minute I saw it, she put up a photograph, a really murky photograph from, she was traveling on the train from Sligo to Dublin, and this is around Gurcheen, which is quite a neglected area of County Sligo. And as soon as I saw the photograph, I knew I wanted to do something about it. So I messaged her and said, "Can I nick that photo and make a drawing?"
Very good.
And
Yeah.
she's a painter friend of mine by the name of Tina Brooks. And so it's
Mhm.
Brooks Wetlands.
Very good. Okay. Yeah, that's great. I didn't realize that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is Thoroughfare.
This is Thoroughfare. This is a relatively recent drawing done in the last 4 or 5 years. It was part of my last show with the Solomon called Void Pastoral. And I'm very fortunate and very proud to be able to say that this was purchased by the National Gallery from
Oh,
that
was it?
exhibition. Yeah.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Factory. Factory skyline.
This is important, I guess, because when we were talking about the notion of accident or the notion of making several drawings on the same piece of paper, and that it's just a process and that you can just scrape something back in much the same way as a painter might scrape back oil paint. So this drawing originated out of 4 or 5 different drawings, and you can tell that it's unfinished. I also mentioned, let's see, yes, I did. Alice Maher talking about there's a stage in every drawing where you just need to stop, or that a drawing is much better when it's half finished. And this is one of those half-made drawings that when I came back into the studio the next morning, having been working on this, I just suddenly realized that I liked it the way it was, and I just stopped working. And it's quite effective. You can see parts of it where I've scraped away the paper and the primer with a very heavy duty sandpaper. And those score marks are very much part of the process and part of the drawing.
Yeah, and you can see the brush marks quite easily, can't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This
Vanishing
was
point.
this is called Oh, I can't remember what this one's called.
Vanishing point factories
Oh
communicating.
yes, factories communicating. This was in
Yeah.
the RHA, I think 2 or 3 years ago.
Hmm.
Um, Sometimes I just set myself the challenge. This drawing goes back to childhood, really. That interest in black and white photographs. I remember being absolutely absorbed by my geography textbook, which had photographs of industry in Denmark and Germany, and photographs of the Rhine River and the barges going down it, and photographs of landscape, photographs of war. So this is, sometimes I just set myself the task of drawing something incredibly bloody complicated just to see, can I pull it off? So this was one of those. It does fit into my theme of a landscape in distress, or a landscape undergoing change. And this is the Birmingham Towers and the building of the main route, a very important artery in England. So I was absorbed with this for quite some time, this idea of factories and belching out smoke and, you know, pollution, I guess.
Yes, yes. And this one fascinated me because of the detail in the frame and the fact that there is a frame. What's the
Yeah, I
significance of
decided
that?
to draw the frame. It's about kind of, I don't know, it's a difficult one to put words on this, and I don't know that it works, but I did have an argument with somebody about whether the Amazon was on fire. And the person I was arguing with maintained that it was fake news and that it wasn't on fire. And how could it be on fire? Because the Amazon is a rainforest, and therefore it's wet, and so it couldn't possibly be on fire. And needless to say, when you Google these things, the Amazon is very much on fire and very much under threat. So it leads you to think, how do you consider an image, or what do you think? And again, it's a childhood thing of spending a childhood and teenage years absorbed with imagery, and that the imagery has an effect on you. So I decided to include the frame because it's about, how do we mark an image, or how do we remember things like war or famine or destruction like this? Do we venerate it in a museum, or do we discard it? It was an interesting thing to me. I don't know that the drawing works, perhaps. It's included in my current show, so anyone in Dublin in Dublin can pop along to the Solomon and make up their own mind. But I
Yeah.
did want to talk about imagery and how we look at imagery. So that's why I included the posh frame.
While we mentioned that, because I wasn't sure when the closing of your exhibition is, do you recall the date that it's actually open till?
It is open until the 1st of March.
Oh, 1st of March. Okay, so there's plenty of,
Saturday, the 1st of March, it closes.
yeah. So it's 5 days a week.
Yeah.
Sorry, 6 days a week, Monday to
No,
Saturday.
it's five. They're closed on
Oh,
Monday,
sorry.
so it's
Yeah,
Tuesday to Saturday until the
Tuesday.
1st of March.
Yeah, great. Okay. Um, Fine. And then we've just two more to go, I think. Yeah, two more images to.
Phew.
Yeah. You're doing well.
Um, the next two are again in the Solomon show, and they're aerial views of the plains of County Carlow. I was fortunate enough to trace my birth family, to discover a host of extra family. So it's been a very challenging and very rewarding experience. But I did meet a half brother who happened to have a small aeroplane. So he took me flying over the plains of County Carlow. And at one point of the, I nearly said voyage, at one point of the flight, it
Yes.
did feel like a voyage.
It was a voyage, yeah.
He pointed down to a farm and said, "That's where our birth father lived." And I've never forgotten that moment and never forgotten that day. And it stayed with me. And needless to say, I took lots and lots of photographs, but it's taken me, I mean, I've touched on this theme before in my work, but only until now did I start to really just think about that type of murky history that people sometimes have, and it's true to say in my case, and that it's the process of drawing that you're kind of reflecting on some of those themes,
Yes.
and perhaps trying to answer some questions about your personality, or about who you are, about identity. And by drawing the fields of County Carlow from this day, taking the flight with my half brother, I think it's that, again, I hate to repeat myself, but it's the time you spend with your work that becomes the quite cathartic, or in some way the work carries something for you. And it's certainly the case in these drawings. In any event, that's the theme behind them. Again, I don't want the work necessarily to be defined by that, but it is important to mention it.
Yeah. Okay. And the final one.
The
And
final one, this was
from
like a
the same
dream.
voyage, isn't it?
What?
It's from the same voyage.
Yes, it's from the same set of photographs, but it was a dream that I had, that the landscape that my birth father lived and farmed was in fact on fire. It was quite a scary dream. And so this drawing just came out of my mind. It's the same fields, but I decided to make it, well, it's called Night Visions, and it was came directly from that sort of dream, which doesn't happen to me too regularly. I don't generally remember my dreams, but that was an important one, I guess.
Yeah, very good. Okay, that's it. Um, Michael, can I thank you for being so frank about your thought process behind things?
No, not at all.
It takes something to come out with personal information like that, and I do respect that. So thank you.
Well, it is important. Thank you for saying that, but it is important that the work not be defined by those things. You
No,
don't
no,
necessarily want to wear it on your sleeve or anything, but it is part of my personality. It's part of my upbringing, and I think the work kind of tries to map some of that terrain.
absolutely. But
Yeah.
looking at the viewer looking at it, it bears no relation
Yeah.
to that as such. Yeah, yeah. No, I understand. Um, So, I mean, I can kind of almost tell that the highlights of your career, I'd like to ask you, what are the really high points that you thought, I made it, I'm here, I've arrived.
Um, let's see. I'm trying to think. Well, it's not every day the National Gallery decide to buy your work. I might as well say that.
Here, here. Yes, yes.
I was recently shortlisted again with the AIB Portrait Prize. That was a moment. Um, oh, there's been lots of moments, but I mean, ultimately, I mean, I don't want to sound mean-hearted, but I'm very good at getting back to work on a Monday morning.
Yeah,
I really am. I think the important thing is just to get back to work. I really do.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
it's a huge part of my life and sort of how I express myself. So,
yeah.
yeah.
Okay. And finally, before I let people in for the Q&A, um, have you any plans or things you'd like to tell us about for the future? Any specifics?
Um,
Or just go back to work on Monday?
Just go back to work on Monday. I am quite keen to get down to Arles in the south of France and spend some time there and maybe see is there anything left of poor old Vincent.
Yeah.
I'd love to do that, and I'd love to do that alone with the sketchbook and just spend a couple of weeks pottering around the south of France. That sounds like a very silly thing to be at, but that's certainly something I'd like to do.
Now that you've mentioned our friend Vincent, um, could I ask your view on these sort of immersive experiences that they're using Vincent's work? You know what I'm
Um,
talking about?
I'm slightly allergic to them.
I thought you'd say that. That's why I asked.
Yeah,
But
I'm a bit grumpy about that kind of stuff. You know, yeah.
watching paint walk across the landscape,
Yeah, I just I object to it.
I think it's freaky. I think it's really
I just
weird.
don't like it one bit. And I
Yeah,
don't know, it makes me think. I remember bringing the kids along to see those bodies, the flayed bodies. Do you know
yeah,
what I mean?
yeah.
And it was
Didn't
just
go there, but
terribly
anyway.
unsettling and really horrible to look at
Yes.
in any
Yeah.
event. Now,
Yeah.
having said that, immersive experiences, you can't get a more immersive experience than going to see Francis Bacon's studio in the Hugh Lane, while I think of it, because it's an
Yeah.
actual experience where you're seeing where he worked, and they've done such a marvelous job on it up there.
They have. Okay, I'm just going to read out a few things. Catherine Gagan says, superb drawings. I agree with Michael that the reworked pieces can become the best. Jen from South Africa says, such an inspiration, Michael, thank you. Finola, very interesting man, must check out his workshops in 2025. Would love to attend one. Love your work, Michael. Um, Desmond has to leave. Great work. Dennis, the patched paper reminds me of some of Frank Auerbach's charcoal drawings. Did I pronounce that right?
Yep.
Luna says, such special work, so moving, beautiful, and poetic. Thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to open this up to people who want to make a comment. I just need to do a few things. Brenda, I
Mm,
see you're unmuted. Would you like to
Yeah.
ask?
Hi.
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 Hello. Hello, Michael. Lovely to see you again. I remember a lovely chat we had in your studio some years ago.
Yes, we did.
And unfortunately, I couldn't get to the Solomon the other night, but I will be going down, of course.
Wonderful.
Couple of things I wanted to say to you. An artist that I had a lot to do with used to say, because he used to do a lot of drawings drawing was very important in his work as well. And he used to say, you draw to see what you think. I don't know what you would feel about that. The other point I would like to make is that it's absolutely clear to me that you are a very, very close observer of what you see around you, and it comes through again and again in your drawings. And finally, I'm very struck and taken with what you say about how you don't want the biographical, your own biographical life to be used as a way of interpreting your work. I appreciate that very much. But I was thinking, I've often felt quite sorry for Vincent because it seems that's the only way he is interpreted, almost the only way, the dominant way by people. If he hadn't had such a torrid psychiatric background, that his work is always interpreted in that way. And I often think that's a terrible pity, because I agree with you about his letters and about his work. He deserves more than that, I think. So I don't know what you have to say, or what would you agree with that?
Oh, I absolutely agree with what you say about Vincent, and I can't bear all the,
Mm,
you know, attachment to the fact that he cut his ear off and shot himself and all of the other stuff. I just can't bear it.
yeah,
He deserves far more respect for what he did, far more respect.
absolutely.
I do want to address one thing. Um, I'm very taken with a quote from Samuel Walsh. There's a very good book, no longer in print, sadly, on Irish artists, and it's called Drawing Texts, and it was published by Occasional Press in Cork by my friend Jim Savage, who's no longer with us, sadly. But Sam Walsh talked about drawing as being an outpouring of thought. And it's a lovely quote if you can find it. I can't quote it word for word, but he
Mm,
talked about drawing being as close to speech in the way that it's an outpouring of thought. And it
mm,
always struck me and always stayed with me.
yeah.
It's an important thing. And
Mm,
that's why in my workshops, and indeed this morning, you would talk about the time that you spend with your work. I fail to put words on it, but it's an
mm,
outpouring of thought, because you're
mm,
very naturally thinking about your life and thinking about the people in your life, thinking about the things that you think about, thinking about what kind of flavored ice cream you like. You're just naturally thinking about things. So
yeah.
I'm very keen on that. I don't, Brenda, recall the middle piece of your question.
Um, I've
But I don't,
forgotten to,
yeah, no, I
but
don't think it was a question. It was more an observation, wasn't it, Brenda?
oh no, it's just about you're obviously a very, very close observer
Oh,
of
yes. Yeah.
of what is around you, and that absolutely comes through in your work. Just one final thing, about letters. I just wondered, had you ever come across Van Gogh? No, not Van Gogh, but Gauguin's letters. I came across them years ago, and I was completely fascinated by them, and I'm surprised that people don't seem to know about them. I think they were absolutely so sensitive, and a wonderful entree into understanding his work better.
Yes.
Yeah, but anyway, that's just by the by. Mm.
Well, I haven't as yet, but I know that of their existence. It's just I'm sticking with Vincent for the time
Of
being.
course.
But
There's enough there.
there was just one thing, just that middle piece of what you said about. I mean, I remember driving the same road every day, twice a day, to bring my kids to school, and you'd be back there at 3 o'clock. And the roads that you saw were burned into your mind because you were seeing them every day. The same lampposts, the same hedgerows, the same ditches, the same fields. And
Mm.
I think that's probably, I love the mundanity of that. And that's why I draw a lot of roads, because they're very much part of my life. And there's something that you're seeing every single day. And there's something that you can't quite put words on, but that you're responding to your environment in a very kind of direct way. Do you know?
And you're not distracted by houses and things. There's a lot of desolation around the area you live in. You
Yes,
know,
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Well, like a lot of rural Ireland, yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Thanks for that,
Thank
Brenda.
you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Before I go on to anyone else, Peggy McNulty says, thank you for a really interesting interview. Love your drawings. Can't believe erasing your beautiful 5 days' work. How could you? Anyway, anybody else like to say anything?
Yes, to Michael, congratulations. I'm a great admirer of your work. And
Thank you, David.
several years now, which is a pity. I would enjoy discussing Van Gogh with you and which edition you read and all of that. But can I ask you a simple question? Do you draw from memory?
Sorry?
Do you draw from memory?
No, I mainly use photographs. But I mean, memory always comes into it because quite often my work is reflective and you are trying to kind of chart a history in some sort of a way. But no, I use photographs and I don't really work on plein air. It's too damp and it's too windy. And, you know, just doesn't work for me.
Yeah,
I mean, I would sit in my car and sketch very, very happily the things that I'm seeing. But generally, I don't work on plein air and take an awful lot of photographs.
When it comes to drawing things like the sticks and the twigs, which I would run away from because I'd eat them before I'd paint them. Do you scrape them back with sandpaper?
It just depends on what scale, and it depends on any given day. But I generally work out of black, so as I say, the Fabriano paper is very absorbent and takes charcoal like a dream. And so you're using your eraser as a drawing tool and pulling light out first. And quite often it's quite a liberating process to do that. So you're not so much struggling with maybe more detailed aspects of landscape. That I mean, it's something I teach a lot of. You're teaching yourself how to see things and how to interpret them through charcoal.
Hi, Paul. How are you?
Hey, good morning. Michael, you might remember we bumped into each other going into the Open about, was it 2 weeks ago now?
Yes, I do remember.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you, it's clear to me that you use photographs, but I was just wondering, because you work in black and white, do you work from a color photograph or would you digitally convert the photograph into a black and white tonal thing?
I have a very out-of-date Adobe Photoshop on my very old laptop. So I take all my color photographs, they go onto my laptop, and I fart around with them and see can I create a better black and white image. So I'm very conscious when I'm photographing in color that I'm thinking about high contrasts, sunlight, shadow. They're very much part of every composition, and it's really important to say that. Yeah. So yeah, I fart around on this old Adobe Photoshop thing.
Yeah.
I thought so. Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Yes.
Finola.
Hello,
I'd just
Finola.
like to know, at the end of your process, Michael, do you use any fixative?
Yes, I
Or do
do.
you find it can change the colouring slightly?
No, well, it does alter it ever so slightly, but it depends on which one you use. Please, please avoid hairspray because it doesn't work and smells appalling.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, everything is sprayed. When you're working on canvas, what happens is that the fixative bites down into the canvas. You don't want to put too much of it on, so a nice quick coat, but it fixes the work. Every piece of work gets 2 or 3 coats of fixative, but I've recently Yes, and I've recently been using a satin varnish for smaller work, so you can present your work without glass, for example.
Wow, that's brilliant to know.
Yeah, and some of the work in the Solomon, if anyone gets in to do that, in to see it, some of the work is on these very beautiful beech wood panels, which again takes charcoal like a dream, and they are all varnished perfectly.
Brilliant. Thanks so much.
Pleasure.
Thanks, Finola. Anybody else?
Presumably, it's Paul again. Presumably, that's a spray varnish, that satin varnish, Michael.
It is.
Yeah.
It's a bit nerve-wracking using it, but once you get used to it, you know, because you run the risk of mocking up your drawing.
Aye, yeah.
So yeah, it's a bit nerve-wracking, but it's spray, straightforward.
Okay. Tara Murphy from the Solomon Fine Arts says, thanks, Michael, for sharing such a fascinating insights into your practice. We are thrilled and honored to be hosting your exhibition at the moment. And that's from Tara. Thanks, Tara.
Brilliant. That's brilliant. Thank you.
Pauline, congratulations on your exhibition and enlightened talk this morning. Brady says, thanks, Michael, for your considerations and the talk. All right. Anyone else before we go?
No, just one question.
Yes, of course, Tom.
The beach that he was drawing, does he prime the timber first, or does he just put the charcoal straight onto it?
Just straight on.
Straight on.
Takes charcoal like a dream. Now you can't get back to your whites, but takes charcoal like a dream. I mean, the interesting thing about drawing, you just have to learn about how charcoal takes to different types of paper in different ways. And that's part of the time in the studio, is that you're experimenting all the time with different surfaces to see how the reactions are.
No, I love your stuff. You have fabulous stuff.
You're very kind. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Tom. Dennis Kelly says, great work, Michael. Thanks, Alan. And Annie Hogg says, thank you, Michael and Alan. Okay, is that it? Yeah, okay, all right. One more thing, Michael, before you go. I'm always interested in what our artists think of other artists, right? And I set you this challenge. If you were to be able to beg, borrow, or steal any work of art from any museum or private collection, costs you nothing, and put it over your mantelpiece, to love it, what would it be?
I'll tell you, I went into the National Gallery in London when I was about 17, and I saw Leonardo da Vinci's Burlington cartoon, which is very, very famous.
Yes.
I'd take that. It sounds terribly egotistical, but I'd have it in a heartbeat.
And you'd put it over your stove there, would you?
Yeah.
Great stuff. Great stuff. Listen, it's been an absolute pleasure, Michael. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Alan. I'm very grateful.
Continued success with you. And if anyone who hasn't seen Michael's exhibition, as I haven't yet, it's on in the Solomon till the end of the month. So there's plenty of time for you to pop in there between Tuesday and Saturday. Isn't that right?
Yes.
Yeah, very good. Okay. So look, thanks all for watching from as far as South Africa to Donabate or wherever. I don't know. It's been a wonderful occasion, and thank you. And thank you very much for your sincerity and your honesty, Michael. I really do.
That's my pleasure, Alan, and thank you everybody for tuning in.
Thanks a lot.
Thank
So
you.
next week we're going to Sydney, Australia, and our guest interview there, Nick Vickers, will be introducing a renowned fine art photographic artist, and that'll be an interesting one. So I get a day off, which is even better. So thanks again for watching, everyone, and look forward to seeing you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.